You know, the moment Sebastian Thorne walked into my courtroom, the air just felt heavy. It was stale, that specific kind of pressure you feel right before a summer storm breaks. I took a slow sip of Christina's coffee, black, lukewarm, exactly how it needs to be to keep me grounded, and just watched the double doors swing open. Thorne didn't enter like a defendant facing serious charges. He walked in like a CEO arriving 20 minutes late to a merger he didn't even want to be at. He walked right past the public seating, completely ignoring my bailiff's hand gesture to pause at the bar. He was wearing a navy suit that I'm sure cost more than my bailiff makes in a year. He stopped in the middle of the aisle, checked a platinum watch, and let out this long, theatrical sigh. "Is this the best room you have?" The reaction in the gallery was immediate, even if it was quiet. In the second row, there was a veteran who usually sits stone still during proceedings. He shifted his prosthetic leg, and it made a sharp clack against the floor. Two construction workers in the back row just looked at each other, a mix of recognition and pure distaste. A young mother near the front pulled her child closer to her lap. You can always tell when the energy shifts in a room because the parents feel it first. Thorne finally made it to the defense table and dropped a heavy leather briefcase. It hit the wood with a loud thud. My court clerk actually jumped a little. Thorne didn't look at me. He didn't look at the flag. He pulled out his phone and started typing. Let me tell you something about courtrooms. Silence is usually a sign of respect, but sometimes it's a weapon. I didn't say a word. I just waited. I watched him tap out a message while the silence stretched out until it became uncomfortable for everyone in that room except him. Let's wrap this up. I have a tea time at 3. My bailiff shifted his weight, his hand resting near his belt, waiting for my signal. I didn't give it yet. Thorne finally looked up, annoyance written all over his face. My time is billable, Your Honor. As the clerk read the charges against Sebastian Thorne, reckless endangerment and illegal demolition of a community shelter, the defendant didn't even bother to stand. He just leaned back, draping one arm over the empty chair next to him, as if he were lounging in a private club, waiting for a drink order. When the prosecutor mentioned the safety violations, Thorne actually chuckled. It was a dry, dismissive sound, but in the quiet of my courtroom, it cut right through the air. In the gallery, the reaction was subtle but physical. The veteran in the second row was gripping the wooden bench in front of him so hard his knuckles had turned white. Behind him, the two construction workers started muttering, pointing a rough finger at Thorne's slouching posture. Even the young mother near the aisle shifted, shielding her child slightly, as if Thorne's attitude was something contagious she didn't want her son to catch. I asked the defendant if he understood the charges against him. He didn't answer me directly. He just waved a hand at the air between us, dismissively. He started talking about progress and economic value, speaking over me as if the law was just an annoying suggestion he could negotiate away. He even interrupted the prosecutor mid-sentence to correct a minor detail about the building's square footage. These people should be thanking me for the upgrade. My bailiff stepped forward just a few inches, his hand dropping to his side. It wasn't just arrogance I was seeing. It was a complete inability to see the people in the gallery as human beings. I found myself thinking of my father then, a man who worked with his hands his whole life. He always taught me that the loudest man in the room is usually the weakest. Between you and me, that kind of noise usually hides a lot of fear, but Thorne didn't look afraid. He looked bored. Rules are for people who fly commercial. Thorne was loud, even when he was whispering to his lawyer. Then he did something I almost never see. He reached into his jacket and pulled out a checkbook. He placed it on the defense table with deliberate slowness, smoothing it out with his palm, looking me dead in the eye. I don't pay fines, I pay salaries. The room went completely still. He clicked a gold pen, poised to write, staring me down. Do you want the check now or after the show? By the time the site manager took the stand to testify, Sebastian Thorne had stopped even pretending to listen. He was openly scrolling on his phone, the light from the screen reflecting off his face while the witness trembled just a few feet away. The disrespect had moved from passive to active. My bailiff is usually a statue by the door, but he shifted his stance then. He moved exactly 2 feet closer to the defense table, his hand resting casually near his belt. The court clerk fumbled a document, her hands shaking slightly as she tried to ignore Thorne's loud scoffing. He was treating this proceeding like a minor traffic stop that was wasting his afternoon. I paused the proceedings and instructed him to put the device away. He didn't look up. He just held up a single finger. 1 second. He finished his text, hit send, and slid the phone face down on the mahogany table with a smirk playing on his lips. This is boring me. The gallery was vibrating with tension. A young mother in the middle row whispered something to her child, firmly turning the boy's face away from the defendant so he couldn't see the man's expression. 2 construction workers in the back leaned forward, elbows on their knees, watching Thorne with the intensity of a fuse burning down. Thorne leaned into his microphone. The audio feedback whined through the speakers, making everyone wince. He didn't ask a legal question. He started lecturing the terrified witness on efficiency. He wasn't defending himself. He was conducting a performance review. I'm literally building the future here. I kept my voice low and controlled. I refused to match his volume. Between you and me, the hardest part of this job isn't the law, it's maintaining the calm when someone is begging for a storm. I told him to address the court, not the witness. He looked at me, bored and irritated, tapping his fingers on the table. Your Honor, are you done? I could see the veins standing out in the veteran's neck in the second row. The room was a powder keg, and Thorne was playing with matches. I repeated my instruction, simpler this time. Thorne leaned back, crossed his arms, and gave me a look that said he owned the building we were sitting in. Make me. When the prosecutor asked for permission to play the video file, Sebastian Thorne rolled his eyes so hard I thought he might strain them. He checked his watch again, making a show of how much time we were all wasting. My mentor, Judge Reynolds, used to tell me that the courtroom is the great equalizer because the truth doesn't care how much money you have in the bank. The lights dimmed, and the screen above the witness stand flickered to life. File SITE_CAM04, timestamp 7:14 a.m. The video was grainy, but it was unmistakable. It showed Thorne standing right there next to a bulldozer. He wasn't in a high-rise office. He was in the mud, shouting at the operator to push forward. In the frame, you could clearly see the shelter's back wall, and standing right there, just feet away, was an elderly volunteer. The audio cut in. It was Thorne's voice, clear as a bell. Thorne, push it over. If they don't move, that's natural selection. The gallery gasped, a collective intake of air that sucked the oxygen right out of the room. The mother in the middle row covered her mouth with her hand. The veteran closed his eyes tight, shaking his head slowly in the dark. The 2 workers in the back just froze, staring at the screen in disbelief. On the screen, the wall crumbled. It missed the volunteer by inches. In the courtroom, the silence became heavy. It pressed down on us like a physical weight. Thorne stopped tapping his foot. His jaw shifted to the left. He swallowed hard. For the first time all day, that smirk was gone. That angle is misleading. My bailiff took a slow step forward, his eyes locked on the defendant. It was a controlled demolition. Let me tell you, when you see undeniable proof of malice, the air in the room changes from tension to judgment. Thorne looked around, realizing no one was buying it. Nobody got hurt, so what's the problem? You know, the second I spoke Sebastian Thorne's name into the record following that video, I could see the physical change in him. The arrogance that had been his armor for the last hour didn't just crack, it completely evaporated. That wasn't natural selection, I said, keeping my voice low, but letting it cut right through the dark courtroom. That was attempted manslaughter, Thorne snapped. He didn't just stand up, he exploded upward from his seat. His chair screeched backward across the floor, a sharp, violent sound that rang out like a gunshot in the quiet room. He slammed both palms onto the mahogany table so hard the water pitcher rattled. My bailiff was moving before the echo even faded. He stepped fully into the well, chest out, putting his large frame directly between the defense table and the bench. He didn't draw a weapon, but his hand was ready at his belt, and his stance made it clear that the time for polite warnings was over. Thorne wasn't looking at the evidence screen anymore. He was glaring right at me. His face flushed a deep, angry crimson, the veins in his neck bulging against the collar of that expensive shirt. "You have no idea who I am," he shouted it, pointing a shaking finger directly at the bench. In the gallery, the reaction was instant and fearful. The young mother didn't just turn her child away this time. She physically shielded the boy's body with her own, curling around him as if she expected the defendant to physically lash out. The veteran in the second row stood up. He didn't move toward the aisle, but he stood ready, his feet planted, not aggressively, but protectively. The two workers in the back were muttering loudly now, a low, angry hum of disapproval that started to fill the space behind the bar. Thorne kicked the heavy table leg. It was a petulant, childish motion that looked ridiculous coming from a grown man in a tailored suit. "I own this city." He looked like a child whose toy had been taken away. "Let me tell you, there is nothing uglier than seeing the veneer of a sophisticated businessman get stripped away to reveal the raw entitlement underneath. I will bury you in paperwork." I didn't move. I didn't blink. I just sat there, perfectly still, and let his anger fill the room until it started to choke him. "You can't touch me." He was unraveling right in front of us. "Do you know how much tax I pay?" Even with Sebastian Thorne standing there, chest heaving and face red, the control had already left his hands. I didn't raise my voice to match his screaming. I just looked at him with the patience of someone who has seen this tantrum 1,000 times before. "Sit down." The command wasn't loud, but in that silent room, it carried the weight of the entire judicial system. My bailiff stepped in close. He didn't grab the defendant, but he put a heavy, firm hand on Thorne's shoulder. It was a grounding touch, a physical reminder of exactly where he was and who was actually in charge. Thorne flinched at the contact. He looked at the bailiff's hand, then he looked up at me, and finally he looked out at the room. You could see the realization hit him in real time. He had no allies here. His bank account couldn't stop what was happening. He sank back into his chair, not with the arrogance of a CEO, but with the heaviness of a defeated man. The fight just left him. Deflation was visible in his entire posture. His shoulders rolled forward, his chin dropped. He needed that. I heard the mutter come from somewhere in the back of the gallery. Then came the exhale. It was a collective release of tension that rippled through the wooden benches. It was the sound of 50 people realizing they didn't have to be afraid anymore. My court clerk, who had been tense for an hour, let her shoulders drop 3 inches. I took a moment to organize the papers in front of me, letting the silence do the work. I found myself thinking of my mentor, Judge Reynolds. He used to say that the courtroom is the great equalizer because, under the law, a billionaire is no taller than the man who sweeps his floors. Today, that was true. The power dynamic had flipped completely. Thorne looked small now. He looked dwarfed by the seal of the state hanging on the wall behind me. In the gallery, the reactions were small but telling. The veteran in the second row caught my eye. He gave a sharp, respectful nod, one soldier acknowledging that the threat had been neutralized. The 2 workers in the back row leaned back in their seats, arms crossed, looking satisfied for the first time all morning. Even the mother in the middle row finally relaxed her grip on her son, letting him look forward again. Between you and me, the most important job a judge does isn't sentencing. It's proving that the rules apply to everyone. The fear was gone from the room, replaced by the calm clarity of consequences. Thorne wasn't checking his watch. He wasn't texting. He was staring at his hands, stripped of his arrogance, just another man in a chair waiting to be told what happens next. "Not so loud now, is he?" I picked up my pen, ready to finalize the record. Order is restored. I took my time organizing the papers on my bench, letting Sebastian Thorne sit in the silence he had created. I didn't look at him immediately. I looked at the gallery, at the people who actually make up this city. Between you and me, this is the moment where the reality finally sets in, not just for the defendant, but for everyone watching. Thorne remained silent, his eyes fixed on the table. "We do not sell justice here," I stated simply. I sentenced him to the maximum penalty allowed by the statute. I ordered full restitution of $2 million to the shelter. I ordered 90 days in county lockup, effective immediately. And I ordered 500 hours of community service, with a very specific stipulation. He would spend those hours rebuilding the shelter he destroyed, brick by brick. Start with the first brick. Thorne's head dropped. He didn't argue. He looked completely defeated, and suddenly that expensive tailored suit looked more like a costume than a uniform. In the gallery, the veteran gave a genuine smile, the kind that finally reached his tired eyes. The 2 workers in the back gave a quiet thumbs up to each other. The mother leaned down and whispered to her child, "It's okay now." My bailiff stood at ease near the wall, finally relaxing his guard as the tension drained from the room. I delivered the final thought, looking past the defendant to the room at large. You can buy a building, Mr. Thorne, but you cannot buy the right to destroy it. Money talks, but justice decides. I let the gavel fall.